Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Ethiopia's electoral board sets a provisional date for elections. The national vote will be the first under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Some critics, though, warn that the country won't be ready by August 16th. Also, with less than 10 months to go until Ivory Coast's presidential elections, voters there are hoping that this time around the exercise goes smoothly, with recent elections having led to crises and even civil war. And in Anambra, in southern Nigeria, we hear from one young inventor who has had a direct impact on his community by creating a hydroelectric generator out of household materials. But first, Ethiopia's first polls under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed may be held on August 16th. The Electoral Board set the tentative date for parliamentary and regional councils on Wednesday. There have, though, been growing calls for the elections to be put off until 2021, for fear the country, which has seen a spike in ethnic clashes, won't be ready. But Abiy, who's brought in a raft of reforms since 2018, has said that it's the only way of transitioning the country to democracy. Some have criticised the August date as being smack bang in the middle of the rainy season, which could affect turnout. Aaron Masho joins me now with more from Addis Ababa. Aaron, so first of all, tell us a bit more about why this vote is so important and why the rush to hold it in 2020.
Thanks. As you mentioned, these will be the first elections in Ethiopia held since 2015, and also the first elections held since Abiy Ahmed was named Prime Minister in 2018. They're important for a variety of reasons. One being the pledge by the Prime Minister for them to be held in a democratic and transparent manner. Of course, elections in the past in the country have always been marred by irregularities. If you take the example of the last elections in 2015, the ruling party, EPRDF, won 100% of the seats in parliament. So that's one reason. And two, another reason is these elections will be held with opponents of the government that have been previously outlawed being allowed back to compete since reforms were initiated by the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, since 2018. So those are the two top reasons. Another reason is because, of course, how this all pan out. You have dissidents, you have former rebel groups who've now joined in to compete in the elections. Will there be violence? Is everybody else's question. Another reason is, of course, Ethiopia is one of the largest countries, the second most populous country in the continent. It is also home to an economy considered to be one of the fastest growing in Africa.
Despite all the reforms brought in under Abiy, we have seen the country see an upsurge in ethnic violence. Do you think that could affect the vote should it go ahead this year?
That is indeed amongst the concerns raised by opponents and some observers as well. As you stated, ethnic violence has been taking place in the country for the last 2 years. At its peak, there were 2 million people displaced throughout the country up until a few months ago. So the big question is: does the government, does the country has it put in place the safeguards to prevent any escalation of violence as the elections take place and as the results are announced? Abiy, the Prime Minister, seems to be confident. He's hell bent on holding the elections this time around. Of course, there's also a legitimacy question because the mandate of the ruling party could end just before the elections take place. So he has to grapple with all these issues, and he's insisting on these elections to be taking place in the stated period.
Thanks very much. Aaron Masho there for us in Addis Ababa. Now, at least 2 people were killed in Sudan when former intelligence officers staged an armed revolt over severance pay on Tuesday. The military managed to contain the mutiny, but the unrest was the latest hurdle in the country's democratic transition following the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir last April. His authoritarian rule lasted 3 decades. Protest leaders who ousted him demanded the dismantling of the feared National Intelligence and Security Service. The delicate management of security elements that were relied on by the former regime may be crucial to the stability of post-revolutionary Sudan going forward.
It's clear this kind of transitional period in Sudan is facing a lot of challenges from counter-revolutionary forces, from those who used to benefit from the former regime and many other forces with different agendas, as well as foreign intervention. This will have to be taken into consideration. Profound states with the power of intelligence and police are considered the pillars of the state. Remember the experience in Syria, when the revolutionaries tried to establish a new regime. But the Syrian Ba'ath regime is a very strong intelligence and police regime, so you have to satisfy such forces, otherwise bad things will happen. What I'm afraid of in Sudan is that if they do not consider this subject and try to satisfy these forces, civil wars might happen or further division in some areas.
Well, next year's African Cup of Nations tournament has been moved up the calendar. The 24-nation competition had been set for June 2021, but is now going to be pushed back to January the 9th to February the 6th to avoid host nation Cameroon's rainy season. The switch is likely to be unpopular, with European clubs who will have to release their players of African heritage in the middle of the domestic league season. Well, this week, Igbo leaders from the southeast of Nigeria held a conference at which they called for the government to invest more in the area of the country that fell into a bloody civil war that ended 50 years ago. More than 1 million people died in the Biafran War when federal troops cracked down on a Biafran separatist movement. The scars have yet to heal for many from that community. Separatist sentiment remains, and critics of the government today say that no effort's been made to develop the region. Now, with less than 10 months to go until Ivory Coast's presidential elections, voters are hoping that this time around the exercise will go more smoothly. Recent elections have led to crises and even civil war. Our correspondent tells us more.
There's fewer than 200 of them, but they're determined to be heard. These young Ivorians have gathered to say aloud no to the prospect of another election marred by violence.
I've seen Bédié in charge, I've seen Bagbo, and I've seen Alassane Ouattara. I know them all, and when they get going, I know they're going to poison the minds of young Ivorians, and it will all start again.
After an arrest warrant was issued for presidential candidate Guillaume Soro and a dozen of his allies were arrested in late December, tensions rose even higher in Ivory Coast. The government denies using the justice system to serve its own needs and accuses Guillaume Soro of wanting to start a coup against the president.
We're addressing the concerns of Ivorians by maintaining democracy, by keeping things calm in Ivory Coast. That's the bottom line. We wouldn't be talking here if there were shots being fired left and right.
With fewer than 10 months to go until the presidential election, the makeup of the Independent Electoral Commission is also already coming in for criticism. The opposition claims it's biased in favour of the ruling party. In the 2010 election, voters didn't believe the results announced by the commission, and the country fell into a violent struggle where over 3,000 died. Many fear the commission is still compromised, which could lead to similar unrest.
The same causes will keep producing the same effects. If we keep the Independent Electoral Commission as it is, we're going to see catastrophic results. We've had post-electoral tensions, but now we're going to have a pre-electoral crisis and a post-electoral crisis. Who will be left in Ivory Coast?
The country's constitution states a 2-term limit for presidents. Another flashpoint would be if the current president tries to stand for a third.
We're still hearing about changes to the constitution. There's even still a question of President Alassane Ouattara standing again. In any case, there are plenty of reasons for people to take to the streets again.
A rerun of the 2010 election is what people fear most. But 10 years on, Ivorians have a different relationship with politics and are perhaps less willing to resort to violence for their politicians.
Frank Kearsley there for us. Now, in Anambra, southern Nigeria, a young inventor has had a direct impact on his community by creating a hydroelectric generator out of household items. In a country where most households struggle with unreliable power, innovations like these can make all the difference. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Emeka Ugwueze started experimenting with metal and other materials when he was just 5. Now he's 25. In his backyard in the southern Nigerian state of Anambra, he's created a prototype of a generator powered by water. The electricity it generates can last over 6 hours. His goal is to promote clean energy. Some of his machines are powered by high-voltage motorcycle batteries with no carbon emissions. His latest invention is dependent on waste.
What this one actually does is that it transforms trashes, your plastic, nylon, waterproof, and the rest into petroleum products like petrol, kerosene, diesel, and some other heavy oil.
His neighbour has been using the hydroelectric generator for over a year.
It is very, very excellent. I'm even begging him to, sell for me, but he said that is not possible now. I must even purchase like 5 for myself and my family.
To watch TV or put the light on, many Nigerians have to rely on generators. In all, an estimated 80 million people in the country don't have access to grid power supplies. Emeka hopes he will soon be able to help some of them by selling his innovations and creating jobs for young Nigerians.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.